Honor mode was recently added to Baldurs Gate 3, and these are the best classes for honor mode. After a few failed runs and tinkering with different classes, I wanted to give you guys the best classes that I have found and based on my opinion, so let's go! Let me know what class you're picking for honor mode in the comments down below. Now, my classes ranked video is entirely relevant for this video, as it is essentially ranking all of the classes, and if the classes are straight up great, they're still going to be good here. So we'll cover the best 5 classes for honor mode anyway, and I'll give you some really important general advice at the end that you should know regardless of your class. We'll start with number 5, and this is the one I'm least certain about, and I think that's the Barbarian. So the Barbarian, and you'll notice a very important theme as we get through this class, this is probably the one that stands out the most, is because it is a heavy hitting class in the early game, it's really strong in honor mode. So the rage mechanic that you will be aware of and how it allows you to deal extra damage, and depending on your subclass and the way you choose to play it, it's extremely powerful for early game, and it's one of the best performing early game classes in the game. Also, Karlach is a barbarian, right? So, you know, that's also helpful in a way. Now, depending on the subclass you choose, you can go into like a throwing build, which is really, really strong, regardless of, you know, whether you're playing in honor mode or not. You get a solid amount of weapon proficiencies, though you won't be wearing armor, which in a way is really good for the early game because you won't have great armor anyway, so you get that extra AC in the early game. And you also get the intimidation check as well, like proficiency just straight off the bat, which is great just because you can pass those checks, which is important in honor game to make sure you're not like initiating fights that you don't necessarily need to. Now, the downside to this class is they are very limited in their overall capabilities, right? For the most part, they're going to be melee. You can't really use any spells here or anything like that, but it does give you options to multi-class them in interesting ways. Like you could go into, say, the {NorZZa} build that I have covered before, or multi-classing them with a druid and using your like rage mechanic to initiate roars that you can then use while you are transformed in wild shape form, right? You've got the options for that sort of a build I've also made on the channel, but they are really valuable for that flexibility, and then the quality of their kit in the early game to then advance into something else is important to have. Number 4 on this list is the Bard. Now, the Bard is really good for a multitude of reasons, right? You get Jack of all trades, which give you skill proficiency, or at least half skill proficiency in every single skill that you don't have. They are a charisma class, which makes them extremely valuable for essentially the entire game, right? There's so many bosses that you can like charisma check to have them, you know, kill themselves or just like avoid that conflict in general. And something that's really important for the honor mode is completing scenarios and quests in ways that don't involve combat to still get that XP, but to essentially resolve that quest, right? And, you know, you can just find them anyway, which, you know, you can still do as a bard, and there's plenty of multi-class or even just straight bard builds you can do to be sort of some sort of finesse swordsmith, or even dual wielding the hand crossbows, which is what I went for my main honor mode playthrough. I was dual wielding hand crossbows, so I've got an offhand and a main hand attack, as well as using my bardic abilities to be able to attack 2 enemies in one turn with the bardic inspiration. You know, there's plenty of good value there, and you can then multi-class them in various ways if you wanted to go around that route as well. But, you know, the downside is their lower amount of armor proficiencies, so you may want to have someone like a cleric or something like that to keep them topped up with, say, sanctuary, or even just with like general health, that sort of a thing. But, you know, they are really good because of their proficiencies if you want to go a dialogue route in honor mode, which is highly recommended. Number 3 is the Fighter, for similar reasons to the Barbarian. Like anything there really can be applied to the Fighter, except they're a little bit more flexible in terms of their ranged prowess, and they don't have to necessarily be melee. You don't have to for a Barbarian, it's just more value to be unless you're going the throwing route. But you've got the extra attacks here. You've got action surge, which is so valuable in the early game when you're dealing with tough encounters. So you've got multiple attacks you can hit per turn before basically any other class gets access to multiple attacks, right? You can attack in melee range, you can use bows in range, you can dabble in some spells, like if you go the Eldritch Knight route. For my honor mode playthrough, I was using an Eldritch Knight Lae'zel that was using a throwing axe with like lightning charged weapons. I was like tinkering with this sort of lightning charges build and like throwing, using Eldritch Knight to like bond the weapon. A pretty solid build overall, but like, you know, you've got like ways that you can then multi-class into other options, or, you know, it's a strong class because of their armor proficiencies as well, and high health pool that you'll be able to survive a lot of encounters. And survival is the most important thing in honor mode, right? Like you want to have at least one character that can get out of these encounters without dying, or being able to, you know, escape and survive and be able to take a brunt of damage, which is really important. Now, as we move on to these next two classes, you will definitely notice a theme. And number 2 is the cleric. Now, the cleric has a ton of domains and subclasses and options. They are so flexible in combat, which you can run them as a melee fighter type paladin hybrid thingy, or you can run them as like a ranged support healer, which is great to have, or even just a full spellcaster like damage dealer. Now, regardless of the option you pick here, the reason they are so valuable is because they have such a wide spell pool that you can learn. They have such a wide amount of proficiencies and subclasses that you can pick. Example being similar to the fighter getting the extra attack from action surge early game, you can get an extra attack from the war domain as a cleric. Like, you won't realize how important it is just to be able to attack multiple times in the early game before anyone else can, right? Like, that extra damage you can output is so valuable. And if you are running Shadowheart, for example, absolutely want to respec her into one of the better domains, because like the trickery domain that she is not great. So respec her into war domain or life domain or whatever it may be. They have so much flexibility in combat in terms of their wide range of spells and spell casting abilities, as well as being able to use melee weapons and ranged weapons and attack in those scenarios, heal up allies when you need to, as well as access to spells that can lock enemies in place, like hold person and, you know, casting commands to have them like drop their weapons. Those sort of things really valuable to have in honor mode. The best class, in my opinion, is the same best class anyway. It's the paladin, right? Like, anything that we said with the bard about charisma and how valuable charisma is for being able to talk and pass dialogue checks and everything is all true for the paladin, because they're exactly the same, being their main modifier, except they have additional proficiencies to allow them to wear all sorts of armor, use all sorts of weapons. They have insane single target damage with Divine Smite plus the extra attack at level 5. They are a reliable source of damage, as well as being able to cast spells when needed, whether that be in melee range or like from distance. They can be support spells, they can be damaging spells, they can be control spells. A core theme in honor mode really is flexibility with strength, right? Like being able to have survivability, but also be able to do a bunch of different things that you may need to do to pass certain scenarios in particular ways that make it easier for you to progress through the different acts, right? And the paladin is really good for that. It's also a great multi-class option as well. Now, after you've even picked your class, right, the best class is actually probably going to be multi-classed. Like, the thing that you really need to think about in honor mode is leveraging mechanics in the game via multi-classing and different archetypes of weapons and gear, etc., to deal insane amounts of damage each turn while having survivability and being able to attack multiple times per turn. Right now, I've got a ton of multi-class videos on the channel, which all, for the most part, are around this, being able to attack multiple times or do interesting things, combine mechanics and systems together, like say putting water on the ground and electrifying it, all that sort of stuff. That's really important for honor mode, is understanding the core systems of the game and how you can leverage them the best for any combat scenario. Right now, I highly recommend to go and watch those multi-class videos if you want some ideas and things you can do. Right, we touched a little bit earlier on like the throw Zerka Barbarian style, or even like the fighter style, being able to throw weapons and deal damage in that way. You've also got something we haven't touched on in this video, is like a Gloom Assassin, right? Which is a Gloom Stalker Ranger and an Assassin Thief. And you combine that because surprise attacks are so valuable in honor mode, because then, you know, the enemies have their turn skipped. And as a Gloom Assassin, you get extra attacks in that turn as well. So there's plenty of options and ways you can leverage multi-classing, but it is important not to multi-class too early, right? So the thing with all these classes that we've listed, they're extremely strong early game, and then sort of mid to late game, then you want to consider multi-classing, because you want to leverage the class specific features and mechanics in the early game you get access to by sticking with that class. Say, for example, the extra attack that you get from a paladin or a fighter or a barbarian at level 5, you don't want to miss out on that, because that is so critical to honor mode. Whereas, you know, in the other modes, You can sort of experiment a little bit earlier and multi-class a little bit earlier, but I definitely wouldn't be doing that until much later in honor mode and really focusing on that. Another pro tip is that you can always pickpocket Withers. He does not care. Take that gold back because that gold is so useful to have in honor mode. So make sure you pickpocket him and steal that gold. I just love that feature. I hope that they don't remove it, but they probably will. But let me know what class you are picking. Thank you for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is NorZZa, and I hope you have a great day.